Indonesia's Constitutional Court has begun hearings to decide whether the re-election of President Joko Widodo was valid. For the latest, our Indonesia correspondent Anne Barker joins me now from Jakarta. Good afternoon to you, Anne. On what basis is the result being challenged?
Kirsten, we know from the election in April that Prabowo Subianto, the failed presidential candidate, always rejected the official results that actually showed that Joko Widodo had won 55% of the vote and he had won 44%. At the time, he claimed that his own monitors, electoral monitors out in the field, had suggested he won 62% of the vote. Today in court, in the Constitutional Court in Jakarta, that figure is 52%. He's saying that Joko Widodo lost the election on 48%. Now, the claims he's making are multi-pronged. He's accusing Joko Widodo, the incumbent president, of money politics, for example. He's claiming that even though his campaign only had about 6 billion rupiah, in fact there was something like 19 billion rupiah used to spend to influence voters. He's claiming that the president abused his power in office and used state facilities, state offices to again influence voters. But there's very little detail on just how these claims are alleged and just what the evidence is. This is only a preliminary hearing today. There are 5 days set down for possible fuller hearings next week. The court could decide as early as this afternoon whether it will proceed to those hearings, but that's not yet a certainty. Prabowo's campaign, his lawyers, have also alleged that the Electoral Commission, the KPU as it's known, was guilty of structural, systematic and massive vote rigging because of the way they counted the votes that showed Joko Widodo had 17 million more votes than Prabowo Subianto. But again, there's very little detail on just what the proof is or the evidence is to back that challenge.
And Anne, is there a heavy security presence in place for today's proceedings?
There is. Yeah, look, there are reports of anything from 35 to 48, nearly 50,000 security forces on the streets of Jakarta. Now, that's obviously to head off the kind of violent riots that we saw a month ago when the official results were released on the 21st of May. We saw huge riots, violent riots, where 8 people were killed. So today they have shut down a lot of the streets surrounding the Constitutional Court, which is right in the heart of town. Protesters, I gather there is a group of supporters for Prabowo Subianto, but nothing like the unrest that we saw last month. Not yet, at least, but certainly police are bracing for that possibility, if not today, sometime in the days ahead.
And Anne, what about the investigation into the election result? How is that going?
That's right. Police have been investigating a lot of the characters or figures they say could have been the masterminds of last month's violence. When those protests broke out, they actually transformed from peaceful protests outside the electoral offices here in Jakarta and overnight became suddenly very violent. There were allegations that the police themselves had shot dead those 8 people. The police have always denied they had live ammunition, saying they only used tear gas and rubber bullets. Now, in the weeks since, they have arrested several people, including several former army generals, some of whom are alleged to have supplied arms or weapons for those riots, some of whom there are questions about whether they provided money and incited large crowds to take part. Some of those people were subordinates of Prabowo Subianto when he headed the Kopassus unit, the elite military unit, sort of 20 years ago. So some of those people are in custody. The allegations against them are still being investigated, and at this stage, nobody has been charged.
Our Indonesia correspondent Anne Barker in Jakarta.